Thanks. What I'm going to present here is one piece of one chapter of my dissertation. I did fieldwork and volunteered in Colombia in different farms, and small farms, following small peasants, neo-rurals, people living between the countryside and urban, in the Bogota city. And I was wondering about the political philosophy of the agroecological, it's not exactly a movement, but agroecological practices, because these collectives that work in the Kendama cloud forests of Colombia are not, for example, linked to the Via Campesina movement. It's more like decentralized practice, what I found. So, quote, we do not practice civil resistance, we obey life, unquote. As I will explain in the following lines, this statement by Roberto Sáenz, the farmer and owner of a natural reserve located in the Tequendama cloud forest of Colombia, describes what he does, what his life's project is about. Obeying life is a conceptual command that I would like to employ to highlight the way in which people's way of life in the cloud forest implies a form of political commitment. I argue that through their way of living, they perform an obligation with a particular place that can be defined as a materially effective commitment with which to sustain a specific relationality. The quotidian everyday doing of agriculture and conservation practices generates such an obligation. As a command, obeying life speaks to an obediential form of power, thinking with Enrique Dussel and the Latin American tradition of Marxist thought. That leads the struggle for multi-species well-being, and that's one aim that I have is to bring in conversation these different genealogies of thought, the Latin American thought, and what I found here, mostly STS. The Zapatista movement of Chiapas that taught us that those who command must command by obeying. This delegated exercise of power, in this case, can represent the multi-species community. Thus, what is at stake is not only the empirical possibility of human happiness within a political community, but also the well-being of animals, plants, and ecosystems. The consequences of unprecedented environmental events in the Tequendama region leads to local people's direct action. The latter is another feature of the mandate of obeying life. For local peasants and neo-rurals inhabiting Anolaima and Northern of the Tequendama region, climate patterns are not the same as some years ago, which makes people concerned. Among many other things, this year water is running scarce. Locals points to how Ojos de Agua springs hide because of the increasing social conflict around water management. For them, all these events are connected. From their perspective, water is alive, everything is alive. Springs do appear and disappear into the mountain. Water does research. For years, some ravines that break the hill have been dry and then have research. This is all tied to social struggles in the small village as they conceptualize. For instance, one can mention the murder of Don Bernardo. He was one of the elders of the San Antonio village and was killed in 2003 as a consequence of a charged disagreement concerning the use of a spring. Unknown young people stabbed him in the head when he was drinking beer in the local store. Many people whom I talked to reference Don Bernardo's incident as one of the main reasons why water is running scarce. From them, these conflicts make water high. What I want to highlight through this short vignette is the relevance of thinking in consequences that gathers people's attention, as a way to unpack how the mandate to obey life is a form of life politics that emerges in catastrophic times. In fact, the problem of water scarcity is gathering people's concern and action. The emergence of a conflictive situation calls people's attention. It is the event as a whole that produces political subjects. Obeying life is a mandate that comes from a different kind of authority, one that deeply shapes human life. It is something that goes beyond the rational agreement of actors within the constraints of institutions, yet might include them. It is my contention that individuals and collectives enact a form of obediential power that is not restricted to human life, responding to the urgency of unprecedented environmental events. Obeying life seems to be a mandate that comes directly from the necessity of survival, leading, therefore, to the direct action by individuals and communities. Inhabitants across the region strongly emphasize that they need water to live well, to maintain human health, animals, and crops. What is the place of state institutions in this case? State institutions such as Corporación Autónoma Regional or CAR, the local environmental institutions, operate in local people's minds as a second-order institutions because people do not trust in them, mainly due to institutional corruption and inefficiency. Obeying life seems to be a mandate that goes beyond state institutional action, even goes beyond civil society activism. What kind of activism is this? People do act and do not wait for external solutions. Direct actions come from the necessity of survival while thinking in human needs. At the same time, one may interpret the mandate of obeying life as a political perspective based on the consequences that a set of actions generate in a given assemblage. Thinking with Dewey, we must in any case start from acts which are performed, not from hypothetical causes for those acts, and consider their consequences, unquote. Practices performed by sequences of human and non-human actions and counteractions produce effects and consequences. Therefore, truth claims are not evaluated in relation to abstract principles, but in relation to the consequences of actions, which allows us to consider the extension of the effects. Those who are affected by consequence found themselves in the event of being in a moment of gathering. In this case, the situation demands to take the risk of making decisions to overcome the contingent problematics. Actions perform causal agency, while events perform actions. The emergent assemblage is composed of human and non-human actors, which creates a difference in the world. For Dewey, that moment of gathering, which involves those who are affected by the consequences of the situation, are the public. One might stress that the public is the assemblage composed of human and non-human actions. The weather phenomenon that affected Colombia at that time, El Niño, produced a severe drought season across the Tequendama region, thereby eliciting actions that affected local peasants. These events triggered collective anxiety and partially supported efforts to change institutional constraints. The public emerges as a consequence of a given moment of surprise, calamity, or discomfort. In this case, regional severe drought impacted people's daily life. There is either a strange presence of an unusual event or a radical absence which breaks the routines of daily life. In short, there is an event performed by the interaction of human and non-human actions that brings to the fore a set of presences and absences. Such a moment of gathering and active composition is what triggers, in this case, political action, and not, as some theorists will say, the exploration of a given set of hypotheses or deliberative processes. In this sense, actions and consequences come first, deliberation and public reasoning come after. This is a form of politics without knowledge. Extreme drought conditions across the Tequendama Valley radically change what was once previously considered a normal weather. None of the people whom I talked with remember having seen the Apolo River become a delicate thread of water. It was precisely this absence that became a constant anxiety and concern. From then on, the river, together with the lack of rain, became a variable that influenced daily decisions in agricultural work. The agricultural activities had to now be taught with a dry river and with a lot of sun. The improvised and vernacular irrigation system had to be adapted to the drying conditions. in order to continue irrigating coffee plantations and ferns. The urgent meetings of the local aqueducts began to be much more frequent, interrupting important social events for villagers, such as the matches of the Soccer World Cup. Nobody had the same way of life, and the different relationships that people had with water springs became evident. The severe drought demanded adapting to the new condition of normality, the new normal. As a result, the administrative board of the local aqueduct, composed of inhabitants of the village, decided for more than 6 months, to make water cuts every other day. This decision was very controversial in the village, so much so that threats were raised against the physical integrity of the president of the aqueduct, local aqueduct, the environmentalist Gustavo Amarillo. The mandate of daily life, as experienced in the context of this particular region, points to a form of socio-ecological mobilization outside established political institutions. In this case, due to the Colombian state's structural lack of governability, people do not wait for external responses. Quite the contrary, they mobilize daily life in order to achieve concrete projects for living well. Direct action in this sense is set off by the assemblage of human and non-human consequences that affects people, conditions of life, and by the ecosystem formativity. I argue that this particular description of what the public is helps us understand a different inaction of the public, one that is neither an extension of the state apparatus nor an extension of the liberal market. It is a socio-ecological form of the public which intersects with the state apparatus. The public is understood as what is common to all participants in the debate. For this reason, the state, as a regulatory apparatus, should distribute communalities. All citizens should have the access to what is shared. The private, as in private property, signals one of the main principles of liberal democracies, the ownership of the liberal individual. Liberal individuals have rights over specific pieces of land. This is the reason why liberalism articulate both the subject of rights and the subject of interest. However, such articulations, as Foucault points out, is not one generated in the context of the state and civil society and understood as universal and pre-given categories. On the contrary, both the state and civil society are manifestations of a set of strategies of governmentality. Both work as spaces where relations of power generate dangerous outcomes. In this sense, it is not correct to overestimate civil society and demonize the state. The question is about which strategies operationalize which relations of power. This could be clarified by looking at the conundrum established by the public and the private in my research in the context of the agroecological collectives. To conclude, let me return to Roberto's story, as he was drastically affected by the drought conditions, alongside everyone who lives in the Tequendama region. At the end of one of our trips with Roberto, in which he bought organic fertilizers for his research, he expressed his distrust of public institutions, but also of civil society itself. In the latter, he was already worn out because he spent a lot of his time in discussions and efforts, often unsuccessfully. Nevertheless, with everything good and bad, these were the means to maintain his research and farm project, neither in the state nor the social organizations, and at the same time, with the state and the social organizations, nothing is enough, and yet everything is. Precisely, the mandate to obey life contains multiple contradictions: skepticism regarding public institutions, doubts about the organizational capacities of civil society, confidence in the obligation that Roberto has with his space, and hope in the excess of life. With the state, against the state, inside the state, outside the state, with civil society, against civil society, inside civil society, and outside civil society. Fundamentally, obeying life points to that direction, a radical skepticism of the potentials to resistance of civil society, given that both civil society and state-based programs belongs to a set of technologies of governmentality. it seems there is a stronger tie which articulates Roberto and his co-workers' obligations with their space. Thanks very much.